Welcome to a Greenville County Library System virtual event. My name is Rachel, and I'm the Adult Outreach and Event Coordinator for the library. I'm so pleased you could join us for this event, Pollinators in Jeopardy, Gardeners Can Help, presented by Greater Greenville Master Gardeners. If you're interested in our other virtual events and activities, do check out our website, greenvillelibrary.org, and select Adult Virtual Events under our Classes and Events button. You can also learn more about gardening and sustainability by checking out our seed library page. That's under borrowing on our website. And if you'd like to check out gardening and sustainability materials, make sure your library card is up to date and come visit us at any of our locations. We look forward to serving you soon. Please join me in welcoming our presenter today, Judy with Greater Greenville Master Gardeners.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the presentation, Pollinators in Jeopardy, Gardeners Can Help. My name is Judy Hermes. How can you mispronounce your own last name? My name is Judy Hermes. I am a master gardener here in Greenville. I wanted to explain to you what the format of the slides was all about, and that format with the Clemson Cooperative Extension on them is there because the Greenville Master Gardener Organization delivers its knowledge and programs through Clemson University's Cooperative Extension. So on to the pollinators. Scientists estimate that between 200,000 and 350,000 different animal species help with pollination. Alas, today we're only going to talk about the insects, some mammals, and two forces of nature that might surprise you. Pollinators are in jeopardy around the world. Their numbers are decreasing drastically. This isn't just a matter of some pesky little insect going extinct. No, the pollinators are very important, as you will see. Fortunately, we humans, we home gardeners, can help. Today I'm going to talk to you about who the pollinators are and what they do, why they are important in our daily lives, why they are in trouble, and how we can help. But before I get to my presentation, I want to say that the details of my presentation talk about the activities of the pollinators and their interactions with the flowers on a daily basis. How the pollinators visit the flowers on a daily basis or visit blossoms on a daily basis. These activities do not give any hint at all of exactly how important pollination is on a macro level. So I'm asking you to please take a moment to go through the next slide with me to see how very important pollination is in our world. The slide is a quote from the United States Department of Agriculture website. It states how clearly and how important pollination is, not just in our own gardens, but it's important to nothing less than all of mankind. That's a tall order. Let's take a look at the slide. Pollination is more than just fascinating natural history. It is an essential ecological function. Without pollination, the human race and all of Earth's terrestrial ecosystems would not survive. It's a profound statement, and it's a true statement. And it gives real weight to the information that I am going to discuss with you towards the end of my presentation about the kinds of things we can do to help the pollinators thrive. I wonder how many of us really know what pollen and nectar really are. These are the things that pollination is really all about. Here's some information that will tell you why all this pollination is going on. It's the food, folks. It's the food. For here, let's start with the pollen. Here's a picture of pollen on a tulip anther. The purpose of pollen depends on who's defining the purpose. To the pollinator, the purpose of the pollen is the food. To the plant, the purpose of the pollen is pollination. Pollen is a rich source of protein. It's got minerals, vitamins, lipids, and fats. And insofar as the pollination is concerned, it's got the male gametes. Well, we would call that sperm, and that is the basis for the pollination, makes the plants reproduce and be healthy. Next on the list is the floral nectar, which is also a part of many plants. The purpose of the nectar depends on who's calling the shots here. To the to the pollinators, the floral nectar is food. To the plant, the floral nectar is very highly scented, and its purpose is to attract the pollinators so that the plant can get pollinated and can reproduce and grow. Floral nectar is a concoction of sugars. These are the carbohydrates that the pollinators eat. It's composed of amino acids, vitamins, and lipids. We can tell from this description that the pollinator's reason for visiting the plants is to eat, um, is to have dinner or lunch, whatever time of day it is for them. Pollination is a life-giving event for both the plant and the pollinators. When a pollinator visits a plant or visits several plants, he's grazing among his favorite restaurants, a little dish here, a little dish there. The pollination, well, that's just an accident of his activities. What happens is he will go into a plant, he will pick up the pollen, and he will um, go on to another plant and drop some of that pollen onto the female part of that pollen. He picks it up from the male part and he drops it onto the female part. Let's take a look at this cross section of a blossom to see exactly what we're talking about. The inside of a blossom, as most of you may know, has anthers and pistils, which are the sex organs of the flower. In this particular cross section, this center structure here is the pistil. It is composed of the stigma, the style, and the ovary. That tells you right away that this is the female part of the flower. These four other structures, the two on either side of the pistil, are called stamens. At the very top of the stamen is a round circular structure. That is the anther, and it is from the anther that the pollen is produced. And the vertical structure underneath that, called the filament, is used to support the anther. So the pollinator transfers the pollen from the anther to the pistil. If that happens within one blossom, of course, that would be called self-pollination within one blossom or within a flower on the same plant. But it is cross-pollination that is uh, pollinating from one plant to a completely different kind of plant, or a plant that does not have both the male and the female organs. It is the cross pollination that is the most important, because it is the only way that unisexual plants can be pollinated. In that case, of course, the pollinator must visit a male plant and then visit a female plant. Um, the oops, the excuse me, the pollinators, as I say, visit the plants, they pick up the pollen from the stamen, and they accidentally, totally accidentally, drop the pollen on the pistil of a female plant, and that is the process that we call pollination. Why is pollination important? The list is short, but its impact is huge. Pollination affects both the food we eat, the food that animals eat, and the quality of our landscape plantings. Let's start with the food we eat. The Bayer Crop Science Corporation estimates that up to $577 billion in annual global food production relies on pollination. Pollination is important because it produces about a third of all of the food we eat. That is 1 out of every 3 bites. And it is responsible for 75% of the world's food crops, including fats and oils that come to us from corn plants or sunflower plants, and are considered part of the food crops that pollination is important for. It's not just food plants and human food that we're talking about. Outside of the agricultural systems, about 80 to 95% of all plants require pollination from the animal world, and for the animal world, and for the native forests and plant life. Healthy plants feed and then provide shelter and habitat for the wildlife. Who are these pollinators that do such interesting work? They are numerous, and they themselves are very interesting. One of the most important is the bee. There are 4,000 native bee species in North America. Here in the Southeast, there are 18 species of bumblebee and 60 species of butterfly. The honeybees are not native to North America. There are 7 species in the world. We have many species here in the United States, but they are not native to our country. There are many thousands of others of native bees and wasps and moths and beetles that contribute to the pollination in the world. Ants and lizards also contribute. And there are also buzz bees and wasps, buzz bees, and specialist bees that are important in the pollination of our plants. Let's take a look at this bee. He's been visiting a source of pollen. You can see how he carries the pollen all over his head and antenna. This is how most of the flying insects carry the pollen. Butterflies carry the pollen mostly on their legs and tummies, but not quite so much. Here's another interesting bee. This bee shows us how some bees carry the pollen in saddlebags in order to bring the pollen and the nectar back home to their nests. What they do when they visit a plant is stuff the pollen into these saddlebags. The pollen pockets are secured by hairs. In some cases, they can be as much as 30% of the weight of a bumblebee. And these only occurs with females, and they are very, very busy little people when they are doing this when they are loading their saddlebags. The movies are very interesting, but I could not get one to come onto my PowerPoint. I am sorry about that. Specialist bees are also interesting. There are about 95 specialist bee species in the eastern United States. They prefer, the specialist bees, each kind of specialist bee prefers to eat just one species of plant, which then makes him called monolectic, or he will eat one or two species of plants, which makes him called oligolectic. Um, the uh, the specialist bees are very, very effective foragers because they have evolved during the eons of time. They have evolved with the plants that they visit. And because of that evolution, they know exactly which plants to visit, and the plants are expecting them to visit. So there is a symbiotic relationship there where the specialist bees and the plants that they visit could not exist without each other. These specialist bees have bigger brains than other bees, and they primarily visit flowers like asters, sunflowers, and willows, just to name a few. Just to name a few. As I mentioned before, there are also buzz pollinators. It's my favorite kind of pollination. Buzz pollinators are required by 9% of the flowers, and what the buzz pollinators are doing is solving a problem. And the problem that they're solving is that the pollen on the plants that they visit is what they call firmly attached to the anther. It won't come off the anther as easily as it comes off the anther in other plants. Well, in the other 81%, 91% of the plants. This pollen needs to be encouraged to come off the anther. And so what the bee does is he grabs onto the anther, as we can see in this picture, and then he turns on his flight muscles to the tune of 24,000 vibrations a minute. This does indeed dislodge the pollen, and you can see here in this picture that this bee has a little saddlebag right there, and that is where she, because we know it's females if they have saddlebags, that is where she is putting all of the pollen that she's getting from the sonication, which is the buzz pollination. The plants that require this pollination, this kind of pollination, are potatoes, tomatoes, pumpkins, squash, and there are many, many others. Let's take a look at the wasps and the butterflies. There are more than 110,000 species of wasps. And it is said, I don't know how they know this, but it is said that there are another 100,000 waiting to be discovered. Wasps are really key to the world's economy and ecosystems because, in addition to being um, prolific pollinators, they are also important as predatory insects who feed off the other insects and spiders that may be in your garden. It is said that without the wasps, the planet would have many, many more insects and pests in gardens of the unwanted kind. Some wasps, as I mentioned earlier, are specialist pollinators. An important example in the wasp world of a specialist pollinator is the fig wasp, who pollinates his friend, the fig tree. Without one another, neither fig wasp nor fig tree can complete its life cycle. Some of the statistics I came across as I was preparing this presentation absolutely were astounding, and here's one of them. There are over 900 species of fig plants. 900 species of fig plants. Each one has its own species of wasp pollinator. Imagine imagine the diversity in that world. Specialist fig wasps are important because the figs resulting from their pollination actively feed at least 1,200 species of mammals and birds. So the extinction of fig wasps would be catastrophic in the tropical ecosystems. Butterflies, too, are, are pollinators, although they're less efficient than bees because they do not pick up as much pollen on their bodies. They pollinate flowers and particularly appreciate a flower with a landing platform like a sunflower. They like strongly scented flowers and a large amount of nectar. Butterflies have a wide range of color preferences, but as a general rule, they are mostly attracted to the top half of the Roy G. Biff spectrum, red, orange, yellow, and they also appreciate white, pink, and purple flowers. And there is evidence, interestingly enough, there is evidence that butterflies can determine which color flower produces the kind of nectar that they prefer, and they will always go for that color of flower. Even some mammals are pollinators, including bats. In the tropical rainforests, the bats carry much more pollen on their bodies, of course, since their bodies are so much bigger than the other pollinators that I've been talking about. They are long distance pollen dispersers. Some of the bats can find the flowers that they like via sense of smell, but some of them find their find the flowers that they want to pollinate, want to visit, want to have dinner at via echolocation. I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that since they're bats. The plants that cooperate in that enterprise are long, bell-shaped, concave flowers like hollyhocks that reflect back the noise that the bat makes. Interestingly enough, tequila which is made from the agave plant, would not be here if we didn't have bats, because it is the bats and only the bats that pollinate the agave plant. I can't leave this subject of examples of pollinators without mentioning that in addition to the insects and the mammals that I've talked about, wind and water are also pollinators. Water is a pollinator for those plants that grow in water. That would be about 2% of the plants. And wind pollination is necessary for about 12% of the plants in the world. Those plants whose pollen is very lightweight and sometimes it is winged. It is true that most of that pollen does go to waste, but much of it finds its target and is successful at pollinating the plants it's supposed to be pollinating. Wind pollination is necessary for all conifers, many hardwood trees, including several nut trees, and even some food crops like wheat and rice and oats. So it's not just bees. The world of pollination turns out, like most things in nature, to be surprisingly complex. We have covered some of the different pollinators themselves and how they do their jobs. We're going to talk now about how seriously they are at risk in today's world. We've all heard of bee colony collapse, and it's true primarily. The danger to pollinators has focused mainly on bees, but all of the other pollinators are affected by the problems the bees face. The report called Pollinators in Peril, which was published in 2017, tells us that more than one half of the native bees are declining in North America and Hawaii, and 25% of those are at risk of extinction. A study in Germany that was published in 2017. Study in Germany reported that of 63 sites that they had studied since 1992, there was a 75% decline in the number of insects at those sites. That's a 75% decline in the number of insects in 28 years, an amazing statistic. Butterflies, too, have been in great jeopardy, with a 90% decline since the 1990s. Pollinators in peril threaten the worldwide food crops. It has been called an approaching ecological Armageddon, adding, and the material that I researched added that if we lose the insects, then everything is going to collapse. The primary explanations for the decline in pollinators are habitat destruction, the effects of our agricultural monoculture, pesticides, diseases, climate change, and air pollution, especially in regards to the bees. Let's take a look at how some of these perilous situations work. First of all, habitat loss. You can see from the photograph a, a wonderful example of habitat loss. Land development has been a major contributor to honeybee losses. Actually, they would have preferred the original meadows and forests. But as you know, progress goes on, and we build apartment buildings, large industrial facilities, sports fields, and so on, to the not to the benefit of the pollinators. So we have overdevelopment that is causing the pollinators to be at risk. We have monoculture that causes the pollinators to be at risk. Monoculture is planting one crop in a given area year after year. It leads to extreme malnourishment for the insects because they need a variety of plants to provide different nutrients in their diet. But monoculture is also not good for the soil. So I'm at a loss to understand why people even do monoculture, but apparently they do, and it is putting pollinators at great risk. It is said that 50% of the world's land mass has now been turned over to agriculture or livestock. With 50% of the world's land mass now turned over to agriculture or livestock, um, habitat and the other reasons for habitat loss, you can see that habitat loss is a serious at-risk cause indeed. The second reason the pollinators are at risk, in addition to habitat loss, is pesticides. I was astonished when I read that pesticides don't just kill the animal, the little insect, right away. In fact, what they do is that it interferes with their brains and it interferes with their ability to navigate. It interferes with their ability to conduct their lives, to forage, to bring back food to the nest. Pesticides interfere with the insect's brains. It prevents bumblebees from collecting enough food to produce new queens. There's a nasty little pesticide out there called a neonicotinoid, which causes all of the problems that I just mentioned: feeding behavior, problems with foraging activity, and so forth. In May of 2019, 12 neonicotinoids were banned in the United States. There are still 47 on the market. All neonicotinoids have been banned by the EU. Diseases would be next on the list. Viruses and bacteria on a plant get picked up by a foraging bee or an insect and brought back to the hive or the home where the insect is. It is the larvae that are most affected. Most of them die, most of the larvae die, and the colony becomes smaller and smaller with each episode. This is a photo of a bacterial disease on a plant. Global warming is another reason that the pollinators are at risk. Global warming alters the pollinator's sense of the seasons, and so with uncommon warmer temperatures, The pollinators emerge at different times in the year when their preferred flowering plants are not available. And insofar as butterflies are concerned, the combination of both wet and cold, out of season storms has killed tens of millions of butterflies. Air pollution, too. Why is air pollution a problem? Emissions from cars and power plants inhibit the pollinators from finding the fragrances of the flowers. Here's a little chemistry lesson. The pollutants bond with the scent or fragrance molecules of the flower and cause the scent of the flower to travel shorter distances. What that causes is is a vicious cycle. It causes the pollinators to travel longer and longer distances to find the flowers, and it so the pollinators are not getting properly fed, and the plants are not getting properly pollinated. As you can see, this grim list shows us a lot of reasons, most of them man-made, that pollinators are at risk. What can we do to help? Unfortunately, we cannot individually fix many of those problems, but what we have to focus on what we can do, which means generally for us in our personal gardens, we can garden with intention. How do we do that? We do it in three primary ways. First, we modify our use of pesticides. Second, we provide physical homes for the bees, the most numerous pollinators. And third, we provide foraging space that encourages healthy and productive pollinators. That foraging space is what we call habitat. Let's take a look at these one at a time. We can't live without pesticides generally, but there are ways that we can protect the pollinators from them. The first way is that we owe it to ourselves to pick plants for our gardens that are not susceptible to insect infestations, so that we don't need to use pesticides. If an intervention with pesticides is called for, it's best to start with insecticidal soaps and horticulture oils that are sprayed in the morning and in the afternoon, and in the early evening hours when the pollinators are not as active. Cultural controls also help. This is a way of suppressing the pests and the stress they bring to a plant by managing your own production practices. That means using a low nitrogen fertilizer, or for example, making sure that the plants are watered adequately during a dry spell. It's taking care of the garden. If you do find a pest, you may be able to control it with mechanical or physical controls. You can pick a Japanese beetle off and put it in a bucket of soapy water, and you can also spray off some insects from plants with a hose. If you don't have a huge amount of infestation, you can the hosing down will do the trick. All of these are ways that you can protect the pollinators from the pesticides. Our second way of helping the pollinators is by providing shelter. Shelter is important. It's essential. You can support pollinators by giving them a place to live and protection from the elements. Bees and wasps all often they do nest in what you would consider garden debris, patches of bare ground or piles of tree branches or other brush. Those are the nesting places of certain bees and lots of other kinds of insects. So being a little messy in the garden is good for our pollinators. The photo here shows a bee hotel, another place bees live besides the soil. The bees start at the back of the tube, of each tube, and lay their eggs in a bundle of pollen and nectar, so that when the larvae start to develop, there is food there for them to eat. Being careful with pesticides and providing shelter are important ways to help the pollinators. But the most effective way, providing habitat, that's a fancy term for planting a garden with plants that support the pollinators. Providing habitat is the most important way we can help the pollinators. Great pollinator gardens offer diversity, and they offer it in many different ways, several different ways. First, it is recommended that the plants you plant in your garden be 75% native plants. We're going to go through what native plants are in a few minutes. The recommendation is that you provide 75% native plants in your garden and thus 25% non-natives. Secondly, it's recommended that you use different kinds of plants. Trees, shrubs, annuals, perennials, grasses all provide food and shelter for the insects, the birds, the amphibians, and the mammals throughout the year, and all of those are pollinators. Third, great pollinator gardens provide 3 or 4 season bloom 24 hours a day. Consider night blooming plants for the night foragers. And fourth, the pollinators would appreciate, thank you, different sizes, shapes, colors, and heights of the flowers. And here are some of the differences in flowers that are important to the pollinators. I mentioned earlier that the butterflies like to land on flat surfaces. Here are some sunflowers in the background that show um, that sunflowers in the background that the butterflies would like. I think there's a butterfly actually right there. Um, the tubular flowers are very good for supporting pollinators like hummingbirds. And the smaller blossoms that don't have very much depth at all, those are very good for bees and the other insects that can't deal with the depth easily. Great pollinator gardens offer plants, shelter, and which can be in the form of a sand puddle or in the form of a bird bath, or even in the form of a soggy sponge that you put and maintain in your garden. The most important consideration is what we in Master Gardeners call the right plant for the right place. What this simply means is that plants plants have their little personalities and they like to be where they like to be. There are plants that like to be in the sun and they won't do well in the shade. There are plants that like to be in the shade and will die if they get too much sun because it's too hot for them. There are plants that like dry soil. There are plants that like wet feet. It's important to identify in your garden what your various microclimates are: sun, shade, wet, moist soil, dry soil, and find the right plant for those places. And when you're planting a pollinator garden, the recommendation is that you select 8 or 10 plants for the diversity. There's that word again, the diversity that I recommended earlier. Provide water. Plant the plants in masses so that the pollinators can see them, and avoid cultivars. Why do I say avoiding cultivars? Cultivar is not nature's product. actually, but it is a product that was produced in the lab so that, in a laboratory, so that a particular plant would produce, say, only red blossoms, or would be able to deal with the sun better than it normally would be. In the process of producing the cultivar, the process of producing a cultivar often messes up the flower's ability, the plant's ability to produce pollen and nectar. And so it is best to avoid those plants, because the whole purpose of this is to plant a pollinator garden that has pollen and nectar for the pollinators. So avoiding cultivars would be the way to go. So if you plant 8 or 10 plants for diversity, provide water, plant them in masses, and avoid the cultivars, you'll have a beautiful garden that's attractive to the pollinators as well as to your neighbors. Let's talk about the kind of plants that are most effective. Generally, these are native plants. As I mentioned earlier, 75% native plants to 25% non-native plants is the recommendation. Native plants are those that have evolved in place and are adapted to the local soils and the local weather. I've read the definition 100 times. Native plants were in place before the Europeans came here. They thrive in the region where they are indigenous, and they thrive in a wide range of soil conditions and weather conditions, whether it's too sunny, or whether it's really sunny or really rainy. Whatever the conditions are, there's a native plant that will just thrive in that spot. Native plants afford less maintenance and lower cost, and they have robust root systems, which allow for controlling erosion and uh, allow for controlling erosion mostly. I'm going to talk about the robust root systems in a moment. Um, so the native plants have also, interestingly enough, the native plants, because they have evolved in place, they have co-evolved with the evolution of the pollinators. And so in so many cases, there's a symbiotic relationship. Again, I mentioned that symbiotic relationship between some of the pollinators and some of the plants that they visit. It also happens that the native plants provide food and shelter for 10 or 15 more species of wildlife than the non-native plants do. Clemson's website at hgic.edu has an extensive list of native plants that you might want to check out while you're in the process of developing your own pollinator garden. HGIC stands for Home and Garden Information Center. Remember, it's .edu because it's Clemson University. I said I would talk about roots. Good root systems manage rainwater runoff, purify and filter water, and mitigate the erosion, as I mentioned before. Let's take a look at this chart of natives and non-native root systems from the Mid-Atlantic area. On the left, the chart shows four root systems of four non-native plants. Spirea, if you can see, the root system goes down to about here. The daylilies, the root system is even shallower. The perennial fountain grass is a little bit longer, but not much. And the fescue turf, my beloved year-round green fescue turf, has no root, doesn't look like it has any roots at all. I was astonished. On the right-hand side, we do see native plants, however. Look at the root systems on the native plants. The buffalo grass goes down to here. The prairie dropseed goes all the way down to here. Black-eyed Susan has a deep and very wide root system. and the common nine bark goes way, way down, way down. The message is clear. These native plants have longer and sturdier root systems that help us provide the many benefits of the natives that we just talked about. What about the non-natives? While the accepted thinking is that pollinators prefer native plants, Dr. Douglas Tallamy at the University of Delaware, an entomology professor at the University of Delaware, says that native plants aren't always the number one choice of the pollinators. Pollinators, in fact, don't care if a plant is native or non-native. They can't tell and they don't care. They just are interested in the pollen and the nectar. A mix of natives and non-natives is a fine way to go, especially if you plant a wide diversity. There's that word again. It's more important, diversity is more important than native versus non-native. Plants that bloom continuously throughout the season, diversity of plants, of height, of color, of, of blossom shape, is more important than native versus non-native. The pollinators don't care, but you care. You care very much because some of the non-natives can be very invasive and can make you very sorry that you planted some of those plants. So I suggest that you do your research while you're planting your garden. There's no reason you can't plant a non-native. The rule is 75% native, 25% non-native. But do your research about the non-natives that you plant. As I mentioned earlier, thank you for helping the pollinators, by the way. I wish you lots of luck in your new gardens. As I mentioned earlier, pollinator-friendly plants come from every kind of plant there is, from trees and shrubs, annuals, perennials, and vines and grasses. I encourage you to get on the internet and search for plants that will attract the pollinators that you want, plants that are attractive to the specific pollinators that you are interested in. Evaluate the plants to see if they are the right plant for the right place. There is no rule that says the plants must be native to this area, except of course for the 75-25 rule, but they must be suitable to grow into your yard, to grow in your yard. Before we move on to the questions, I want to share with you some of the resources that I used in putting together this presentation. I started the way I hope you will start, and that is just Google something you're thinking about. Say, spring flowers for hummingbirds, or plants that the butterflies like, um, or something that will grow in shady, wet soil. You know that one site will lead to another. Take the time to plan the pollinator garden and know where the particular plants will thrive to help you decide what you want to plant. I especially encourage you to visit the Clemson HGIC website that I mentioned before at hgic.edu and the Carolina Yards Plant Database, which is a part of that website. Other resources that I have visited include the Audubon South Carolina website, Iowa State University Bug Guide, and all of the others on this list. If you do your research, I am sure that you will build a wonderful garden that the pollinators will love. Thank you very much for your attention.
We've got someone saying thank you for sharing your presentation. It was a lot of important information. Excellent. Yes, thank you.
You're quite welcome. You're quite welcome. I wish everyone good luck in putting together their pollinator gardens.
Thank you to Judy and to the Greater Greenville Master Gardeners. We appreciate your time. Thank you everyone for joining us for Pollinators in Jeopardy! Be sure to register for the next live gardening and sustainability virtual event that's coming up on Monday, December 14th at 6 p.m. That's indoor herb gardening, where you can learn to make your own upcycled self-watering planter. So be sure to register and request a kit so you can make your own planter as you watch the event. Um,
Interesting.
yes, and everyone do check out our adult virtual events page for more content in the meantime. And as always, don't forget your great ticket to all these resources is your library card. So you can access our databases, downloadable streaming that includes TV, ebooks, audiobooks, and so many other free resources. And the Seed Library page on our website is filled with more information on gardening and sustainability and has lots of appropriate materials from cookbooks to magazines to gardening tips. And as always, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for library updates and sign up for our e-newsletter so you don't miss great programming like this. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.